Welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast with Juli and Thomas Hobby. We are marriage coaches who help couples with pain points about money, intimacy, and communication go from being overwhelmed to being secure in their marriage.
If this is your first time listening to us, thanks for checking out our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Let's dive into this episode. Hey everyone, just wanted to take a minute before we dive into this episode and let you know about a cause that we're trying to support here at Marriage Puzzle. If you're actually listening to this beyond December 2024, you can go ahead and skip ahead because the timing for this cause has passed. But we have some friends, Jonathan and Kim Portillo, who are actually being sent by their church on a missions trip to South Africa. Their church has a campus in South Africa, and they are going to help do some various things there with that campus in November and December. And we just wanted to put it out there and try to support them as much as possible, put it out to all of our supporters, because the Marriage Puzzle podcast, Marriage Puzzle coaching may not exist without the fact that we had crossed paths with Jonathan and Kim a few years back when we all worked on a church staff together in Colorado. Jonathan and I used to do a podcast together, and since we moved away from each other, he is now doing that podcast on his own while I'm focusing here on the Marriage Puzzle podcast with Juli. His podcast is called the To Be Men podcast. So men, if you're listening to this, go and check out that podcast as well. He does gives some great tips for men, how to become better fathers, better husbands, better men in general. Women, you can feel free to listen to it as well and then send it to your husbands. But it's a great podcast, and had Jonathan and I not met, had Jonathan and I and Juli and Kim not met each other, that may not have sparked our creativity in doing a marriage podcast. So, we're grateful for the fact that they've been in our lives, and we want to just do everything that we can to support them. So if you feel led, they've created a video about what the missions trip is going to be about. We're going to leave the link to that in our show notes of this episode, so please go and check out that link, watch their video, take a few minutes out of your day and watch that and see if you feel led to give to support their missions trip that they're going to be going on. Thanks so much for tuning in, and let's dive into our episode.
I'm back, and we're talking about the book From This Day Forward from Craig and Amy Groeschel. So last episode, we dove right in about seeking God, so making God first and your spouse second. And we want to give a quick update about that and then dive into chapter 2.
Yeah, so there's lots to know about that episode, so if you haven't heard the whole thing, make sure you go listen to it or watch it. We have the video episode out on our YouTube channel now. We announced that in the last episode too, so make sure if you're listening to this now, do us a favor, switch over to YouTube for a second, subscribe to our channel there. That'll just help us out. And then feel free to watch or listen to the podcast wherever you want. But go listen to that episode. We talked, like you said, about seeking God first together, then making your spouse second. And one just thing we kind of pointed out last time was that sometimes it can be pretty easy to put something else in the second place, whether that's work or kids or, we even said family as a whole, like putting your family as a whole, spouse and kids all together in that second place. And we were talking about splitting that kind of into two separate ways of thinking, ways of managing your family. So make sure you go check that out.
Yeah, and so with seeking God first, we kind of challenged you guys to come along with us if you wanted to try praying with your spouse. And you had even said it's scary, it's new for us, like outside of dinners and mealtime prayers and things like that. We spend
private prayer.
Right. Yeah. We spend a good chunk of time now. Man, it's been like 3 or 4 weeks. It's been a while since we hit record, and but we've been doing that every morning. Our alarm goes off.
Almost every morning.
Monday through Friday.
Yeah, Monday through Friday. We're really consistent.
Weekday routine, and I have loved that. And it's not just like thank you for the day, like amen. Like it's good. We each take a turn and we kiss afterwards and we start our day. It's just been sweet. So I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
Thank you for leading us in that. And
I would say it's gone really well, too. I think that, there are still some mornings where I'm like, oh, gotta do this again. But like, it's like, I'm still getting used to it. Like it's still, like in fact, there was a day last week where, we said we start off with our Bible reading plan. We did that. And then we just like, we're still in bed and you were like, whose turn is it to pray? I was like, oh, I totally forgot. Like that's our next step. And so, it's still for me kind of working into, my routine a little bit to remember to do it sometimes.
Just because we take turns who starts that day. We both are praying. Like we both pray, and it's just been cool to be more bold in asking each other what we can pray for each other, asking God for those things, and then being able to thank God for those things. And so I think we've grown closer together. So we challenged you last episode, so if you're not yet praying with your spouse like that, join the challenge of it, because I think it also leads into, obviously, they wrote that as chapter 1. Chapter 2 is titled Fight Fair.
Yeah.
And I think it just helps, like, lay the groundwork of seeking God first, but then, like, moving into you're still going to fight.
Yeah.
You're still, all couples, maybe even relationships, are going to have that tension. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, and I think they even talked about in the first chapter that, as kind of a segue into this chapter, that if you've been praying together with your spouse, it's a lot harder to really, let me say it again. If you've been praying together with your spouse, doing that together is the key to the next part. They said if you've been doing that, it's really hard to be on opposing ends from your spouse when you're fighting. And that's kind of what leads into this whole chapter about fighting fair.
Yeah.
Is that what the chapter's called?
It's called Fighting Fair.
Fighting Fair, okay.
And both, just to be like completely honest and straightforward, how we do this is when we take you guys through a book with us, Thomas and I both read this like separately. So whether it's from the print book or an audio book, and then we come together and discuss that chapter, and then here we are on the podcast discussing it. And so I love that both of our like biggest takeaway, underlined if you will, says unhealthy couples fight dirty with below the belt jabs, sucker punches, angry accusations, and bitter grudges. Healthy couples fight for resolution. So unhealthy couples fight for personal victory. And we're trying to help our marriage and lead you guys into the healthy couples who fight fair.
Right. And it's very easy, I would say, to slip back into that, even if you have been really working on this area and working to fight towards a resolution with your spouse. And let's pause there for a second and say, when we're fighting towards a resolution, that means instead of being on opposite sides, you can still have different opinions,
right.
You can still have different points of view. That's what makes you individual people. But when you're fighting towards a resolution, that means you're both fighting towards what's best for your marriage, your family, that situation that you're in, whatever it may be. And, resolution is a much better word than compromise, because compromise still means like you're both losing a little bit. If you're working towards a resolution, then you're both trying to get on the same page about whatever the best option for that specific fight is. So if you're careful, you can avoid slipping back into that being like, no, I'm gonna win this fight, because that's what you really want to avoid. If you're really trying to follow this scenario and really trying to fight fair, you've got to stop trying to fight to win, to be right, to win, whatever. You've got to work together. You got to go from opposing standpoints to coming alongside each other and, holding hands to like walking towards a resolution. I mean, not literally necessarily in that moment, maybe, but figuratively holding hands, like linking arms, like, okay, we are in this together.
Yeah, we're on the same team, but I think a lot of couples just fight to fight. And maybe that's from their upbringing. Unfortunately, if they saw their parents' marriage that way or lack thereof, just, you don't know why their, defense is up, their walls are up. And so I look back at, we've been married 18 years. I know we haven't done this right and well in the beginning. And
right.
part of that's me. I was like, oh.
Mostly me.
You? Or are you saying what I should have said?
No, I said, you said part of it's you. I said most of it's me.
Oh,
That's what I meant.
I was trying to admit my own bringing into it was as soon as we had a disagreement, maybe we just didn't see eye to eye on something, or I wanted it done differently or something, I would lean into that with anger to oh, I got my boxing gloves up, let's go to fight. And now over time, a lot more books, podcast later, and maybe it was also having kids, we started softening that and realizing how to fight fair. And so now it really annoys me because we have 10-year-old twin boys. So when they have a disagreement or they're arguing or they're fighting, maybe even physically, I'm like, why don't you guys understand this? Talk it out, and you're on the same team. And I'm saying things that I'm like, oh wow, how often our marriage is kind of resembling a sibling relationship, and that's not fair.
True. I mean, our twins tonight got into an argument where one of them started spitting on the other one. Thankfully, we don't do that in our marriage.
No, but I that's why I'm I don't want to make light of that, because that might be the situation you're in.
Right.
And that's why I want to say, don't look at us now and think, oh, you've always had it easy or perfect.
No, not at all.
We've had to still learn these principles, and that's our heart now, to get on the mics and teach and our marriage coaching, so that we can assist
and
people through this, just like we're trying with our boys.
And like I said, it's easy to fall back into old ways. And so there have probably even been times in the last couple of months that it's kind of started to slip back into that. So it's never a perfect scenario. It's not like we've figured it out and we're great at it.
No, we're tested all the time.
Yeah. And so one thing I do want to go back to that you mentioned was how you learned to fight in your marriage from your upbringing. And both of us come from divorced parents.
Right.
And I would say that from my experience, in growing up in my household, I think it probably might echo the same for you, from what I've heard, and other marriages that have ended in divorce with kids involved. Everyone that I've seen seems to fight more in divorce than they do when they were married. And I almost think that that's because once you're divorced, you have no reason to have to, the Bible calls us to love everyone, but you have no reason to have to love that person anymore. Have to like that person is probably a better way to put it. You have no reason to have to like them. You're separated from them. You just have to, and I'm not speaking from experience here other than the child in this scenario, but it appears as though you have no reason to have to like that person anymore. You just have to tolerate them. So it would seem to me as though it makes it so much easier to fight. So growing up in a household like that, where it was constantly back and forth, between houses, and then, when the disagreements happen, it's a quicker blow up now between my parents and what I'm seeing. So then that's what I was around more. And so then that probably kind of imprinted on me for when we got married, that it was okay, if, you said earlier, if we're going to fight, get the boxing gloves on, this is clearly how it goes. I have no other experience otherwise to see. So that's something to keep in mind, is your spouse's background and your background in terms of what type of household you were raised in. We were both raised in houses similar. Would you say that is, you would kind of echo a similar statement,
Yeah.
like to what I was saying?
Yeah.
And so, if you both come from a background like that, know that that's going to be how it is. If one of you comes from a background where you felt like you grew up with your parents, not fighting, or you just didn't hear them fight very often, could mean that either they didn't, so their marriage might have not been super healthy behind closed doors because, they just pushed everything down.
Yeah.
Or it could be that they were very good about keeping it private and having their discussions in private, not in front of the kids. Could go either way. But if you grew up that way and your spouse grew up in a household where there was a lot of fighting or divorced fighting or whatever, then you have to learn that about them and realize some of what they're coming at you with might just be from their upbringing.
Yeah.
Might not be their personality, but it may have influenced their personality and their view on marriage and fighting.
That gets into a whole nother thing we do with marriage coaching. So it's different packages, but just, side note there to explain it, because it's usually about 8 weeks of coaching with us. But one of them, we do a family map, because I think it's very important to know each other's upbringing, because that's what it was early on, I think, with us, that I still had triggers of just the intensity of those fights that I was around. So when we had that disagreement, I thought we should rise to the same level of intensity, or that you were going to. And so I've heard you say, I'm not your dad.
Yeah.
Like, I am your husband, and we're on the same team. And it's like, oh, okay. So some of that is just needing to talk to somebody to kind of take those layers down. It doesn't mean that you need to get out of the marriage. It needs to be like, wait, I might have some personal stuff that I need to work through, or open up with my spouse so they can understand those triggers and work through that.
And it doesn't mean it's unfixable either.
Right,
if both of you are at that point, or you feel like you're not making any progress, you don't have to just be like, well, this is just like, the household I grew up in, we're going to just end in divorce. No, that's not the case.
Don't speak that over.
That's not the case. And, I think we'll probably get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Like rules around fighting, things like that. I think that's been a big thing for us is, we've learned the rules of our fighting the hard way. Like, it was like, we got put in the ring together, and then we were told the rules, of the fight 6 or 7 years later. And so then we learned, and so we had to create our own ground rules when it comes to fighting. And the book talks about some other ground rules as well. You don't necessarily have to take all of these that we're going to tell you. Use what works for you, but some of them are pretty good, so you might as well use them.
Well, we've done a podcast about some rules from a different book, but these are specifically from Craig and Amy Groeschel. There's 6 of them. So I think they say these are their rules, so they openly share. And I think you said, like, come up with your own rules,
right,
or talk to us and we'll help you navigate, what you can stand by, because you're going to come up with these and agree to them when you're not in a fight. You're not going to be like, call someone a name and be like, hey, you're not allowed to call me a name. Like, we that, So, but that's their rule number 1 is never call names. Number 2, never raise your voice. That's hard.
That's really hard.
That's really hard.
Yeah.
And again, these are their rules, but I think, like, sometimes just thinking through, when you're calm, what are some things that we can have for our marriage that will be in the back of our head to, like, keep us calm. Their number 3 is never get historical. And it literally says that's not a typo.
Right.
He didn't mean to say hysterical, although I would say
I literally was thinking in my head, like,
somebody. No, but that's the, like,
don't bring up stuff from the past.
Yeah,
like,
that is something you and I have been really working on. That is hard, but it's because when you feel that, like, tension or whatever, you need to talk about it then.
Right.
And if you don't, then you shouldn't be allowed, like, weeks later to have something else that you're talking about and be like, yeah, and you did this, and you did that,
Right.
and you did, and you're just like unloading, and the person just can't keep up. Like, what are we talking about right now?
Yeah, there's another book that we read that was talking about withholds, and there's positive withholds and negative withholds, and positive withholds are not telling your spouse the good things that you like about them. Hey, you look great today, or whatever, and those are needed. If you withhold it, you're doing a disservice to your spouse by not telling them that. But the negative withholds are also the same thing. If something happens that upsets you and you don't tell them about it, that's a negative withhold. That's like you withholding it, saying, all right, there's another bullet. Like, I'm going to save that for later so that when we get into the next fight, I can unload all of this on you. And that's a negative withhold. You can't do that. You've got to bring it up right away. Otherwise, you're just pouring gasoline on the fire later.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that's like number 4. And we've had this. This was like the first piece of marriage advice that we ever heard and have stuck to it. Never use words like never or always. I think we even did a whole podcast episode about,
I believe so, yeah.
that concept. That's you never do this and you always do this. Is that really true?
It's never true.
And that's just extreme. So if you take those 2 words out of your vocabulary when talking with your spouse, especially around maybe a fight, to fight fair, again, it kind of slows me down as I'm communicating with you and I might be upset. It really slows me down to like be careful not to throw those out. Into that, because I can't really take that back and be like, I didn't mean that, like so unless it was like a positive, you always kiss me in the mornings, like,
but that's not true.
I know,
like,
I know, I'm trying
it's
to, like,
not true. Like, there's
just,
never and always are never 100% true. And so it's like you can't, there's not a scenario in which you can say like that's literally happened 100% of the time without fail ever. Like, just hasn't happened.
Yeah. Their number 5 rule is never threaten divorce. That has been one we adopted as well. Did a podcast episode I think it's titled "Don't Say the D Word."
Yep.
We don't
Great
even
episode. We had special guest Dr. John Deloney on that one talking with us, and you should definitely go check out any of his content because he's got some good stuff about out there. Like, this really helped our marriage.
Too.
Like, yeah,
like just like the moment you first of all think that is giving yourself an out.
Yep.
The moment you say that, your spouse then can be like, okay, I guess we're done. Like, and especially in a fight when you're not thinking clearly, you can't take that back.
Nope.
So don't say the D word.
Yeah. Now your spouse is going to be on edge from that point forward if that's not what they want. It's not fair. I mean, he had a really great saying in that episode. I don't remember it fully clearly because that was a long time ago. But about something about weaponizing it. Like, when you weaponize that, it really damages things in the relationship. And so go check that episode out too. It's a really good one.
Yeah. And I think, just not to keep doing commercials here for marriage coaching, but I just want people to know why we're passionate about it, because there are some many counselors out there, and I think people think of counseling is because they are on the brink of divorce. And we're marriage coaches for a reason, to coach you to be better, coach you through these topics that we're unpacking on all of our podcast episodes, to coach you through, a guided curriculum and exercises that we have on each call. And that way you don't have to even think about divorce. We want to save marriages before they're too far gone. To sum it up, that's what on my heart to say.
Yeah, exactly. What's next?
Number 6 is never quote your pastor during a fight, because he's a pastor.
Yeah.
But that could be your rule.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That was a funny one. True. I mean, like, and like, you could expand that into like never quote your mom or dad in a fight. Like, well, my mom always did it this way. Like, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, you're not married to your mom. Like, this is a different situation. So, and fill in the blank there, as to the person that you don't want to be quoting. And, that could also be like, don't weaponize, things your spouse has said and quote them on certain things. I mean, look at any election time period and see that there's all kinds of quotes pulled out of context to weaponize against the other person. And that can be often what happens. When you go to quote somebody in an argument with your spouse, you're pulling a snippet of that quote to weaponize against them without the full context of what they said.
Right.
So that's what you have to be cautious around.
Yeah. So ultimately, to quote Craig Groeschel and then Amy in my closing, he says, "Don't fight each other. Fight for the marriage you both long to have." And then she, because there's this Amy's take at the end of each chapter, which I love, she says, "Redefine winning to mean that at the end of every fight, let me start over. Redefine winning to mean that at the end of every fight, you're closer to each other than you were when you started."
Right.
And I think that's what you were saying, like the fight for resolution.
Yeah.
And even if you're not like, "Whoo, yay, I love you so much, that was a great fight." Like, what do you need to do then after that? Like, breathe, calm down, embrace, hug each other, say I love you, say I'm sorry if you need to, say I forgive you if you need to, so that it's not just like got through that and moved on. Like, how can we now go from this conversation that we've had to being closer than we were when we started? Yeah,
fighting for the resolution that you both need is key, but apologizing is like the number, like figuring out the resolution is good, but you can't really reconcile until you've apologized. And that may not mean you did something wrong, but apologizing for probably the way you treated them during that fight, forgiving, whether the other person apologizes to you or not, you need to forgive them, otherwise you're not going to be letting it go. That's how historical things keep getting brought up, is when you don't forgive, you bring that up. There's a difference between, like, you can forgive without forgetting, and there's another book that we read that said, like, you can forgive but not forget, because forgetting like eliminates that boundary. Like, if you remember what happened, even though you've forgiven it, you'll know, okay, I'm not letting anyone cross this boundary again. So apologize, forgive, and then embrace is that huge key at the end to show, like, okay, we really are back on the same team here. Like, there's something about, even if you're not physical touch love language, there's something about that just being like, okay, we are really back on the same side. We like each other enough to hug again.
Sure.
So, like, we can actually move forward in our relationship now for that result that resolution we were trying to get to. Now we can actually work on that, because we've embraced, we are back on the same team again, and we can actually put the steps in place to work towards that.
Yeah.
So,
good stuff.
Yeah, great episode. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you follow us on social media at Marriage Puzzle, and that includes YouTube now, so go check us out on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. We are putting the full videos of these podcasts out now, as well as we're putting some shorts out there that you can find on YouTube, so we really appreciate your help there. And then if you liked this episode, make sure you text it to someone right now. So if you are listening by yourself, send it to your spouse. If you really loved it, just text it to them right now. That's going to help spread the word. And then we will see you next time.
See ya.